Well, my reaction is quite similar to that of most of the things that Mr. Trump's government is now doing. I see it as primarily designed for the political success he hopes it will have domestically here in the United States. His position as president is shakier now than it has been since he took the oath of office half a year ago. His polling numbers reflect that. The desperation with which he is casting about for almost anything that can distract the public from the issues that are driving down his popularity. And those issues are inflation, which, while it is still not serious, is ongoing and looking like it will speed up in the second half of the year, which is very, very bad news for him. The fact that he didn't bring, as he had promised, the war in Ukraine to an end, and on the contrary, it seems to be getting worse, that he's initiated a whole new war in Iran, that he has done nothing to stop the horrors of Gaza and the Middle East. And now he's caught up in a scandal in which the promised transparency of his government is clearly upended by the fact that they're trying to hide everything having to do with the pedophile financier, Jeffrey Epstein. So he is in very bad trouble, and he is casting about for almost anything that can look at least a little positive or at least a little moving in the direction he had promised. To give you one final example, over the last 2 days, he has effectively and literally accused President Obama of treason, which is a crime punishable by death in the United States. It is very extraordinary, to say the least, for a president. I'm not sure it's ever happened in American history, for a president to suggest, let alone to declare, a prior president, especially one still living, to have committed a treasonous crime. You only would do that if you're desperate to distract. So the deal with Japan, announced a few hours ago, which looks good, is another effort to suggest, well, I'm at least succeeding somewhere over here in getting countries to submit to tariffs that are higher than what they used to have, higher than what people thought they ever would agree to. And here it is, I can claim that I agreed to it. I think that's the way to understand this. I'm not clear why the Japanese went along with it, except, of course, their government has its own crisis to deal with now. And a final point, it is not uncommon in international dealings for there to be not only the signing of official documents, but also the signing of secret documents that are not made public for a long time. I think it would be wise for everyone to keep in reserve at least the question, were other things done or given to Japan in this case to help it make a decision to sign the official agreement to a tariff as high as they agreed to? The tariffs mean that an American business or individual who buys a commodity produced in China has to pay whatever the price of that commodity is, and then on top of it, pay the tariff. And as I have explained many times, the tariff is a tax imposed by Mr. Trump and paid by the American company that brings foreign-made products into the United States to conduct its business. For example, a huge amount of what you can buy at Walmart or through Amazon or at Target or any other store comes from China. So now the company, the American company, Target, Walmart, Amazon, has to pay China to get the product and then pay Uncle Sam whatever the tariff is on top of it. Well, here's the truth. Yale Lab shows, as other documents do, that foreigners are not lowering their prices because Americans have to pay more, having to pay this tariff tax to Uncle Sam. Mr. Trump may have hoped for that. Maybe that's why he kept saying in words that were funny because they were wrong, that tariffs are somehow paid by them, that the tariff is a burden on China. No, China doesn't pay the tariffs against China. Americans do. And when Americans do, you might hope that the foreign country, knowing that Americans have to pay more because the tariff is there, will lower their price and therefore, in a way, pick up the cost of the tariff. But they're not doing that. We can already see after 6 months of hefty tariff impositions that there is little or no sign that foreign producers of goods coming here are lowering their prices. And you know what that means? It means that the higher price, because American companies are paying tariffs, are either going to eat into the profits of those companies, or they're going to pass on the tax they now have to pay, that tariff, to the rest of us, to consumers, and we have to pay. So, for example, in recent days, a lot of publicity attached to Mr. Trump's putting an enormous 50% tariff on Brazil, the largest country in Latin America, a very important country in the whole world economy, and a country that happens to be the largest single source of coffee coming into the United States. That means that the companies bringing coffee from Brazil into the United States are now going to have to pay whatever it costs per pound of that coffee to get it from Brazil shipped to an American port, and then the company has to pay Uncle Sam 50% of that in addition to get that coffee into the company's hands. And you know what that means? In the second half of this year, you're going to see hefty increases in the price of your coffee, whether you buy it by the pound or you pick up a latte at the coffee shop. We're all going to pay more. Wow. And you know what that means? We're going to economize on other things. We're going to have to, or else we're going to have to do without the coffee shop experience or without the coffee altogether. And that means large numbers of coffee shops are going to suffer a loss of business. For many of them, since the profit margin is thin in a coffee shop, they're going to go out of business, which means they'll pay fewer taxes. And when they lay off workers, those laid off workers will be paying lower taxes because their income is. Those are all subtractions from whatever money the government gets from the tariff on Brazil. It comes out of you, it comes out of me, and it bites back. I can see why Mr. Trump likes the tariffs. He apparently does not need the Congress to agree, even though clearly that was the intent of the separation of powers when the Constitution gave the Congress the monetary purse holding. He can apparently impose them at will, and he does it, changing from day to day, from hour to hour. Everybody is complaining around the world, American businesses and foreign businesses alike, about this quote unquote volatility. No business can make plans not knowing what in the world the market situation is going to be. Will the people who normally buy the product be able to do so, or will there be a tariff attached to it by Mr. Trump that will dissuade people from buying it? And what do you do in that situation? Many businesses are holding back on decisions about how to invest money. And when they do that, when they don't invest, then they're not engaged in activities that include paying taxes. So the money coming into the government from a tariff that is paid has to have subtracted from it the taxes that aren't being paid because people affected by tariffs are holding back from their normal and previous economic activities. The Yale Economics Lab estimates that the tariffs in their first 6 months, that's how long we've had Mr. Trump's government, brought in maybe $50 billion. And from that, you would have to subtract whatever businesses are going out of business because of the tariffs, and I'm going to give you some examples. Whatever businesses are doing less business and therefore paying fewer taxes than they used to, all of those are subtractions from the extra 50 that the tariffs bring in. So the net effect of the tariffs now is in the 20 to 30 billion, maybe a bit more. And I can assure you, in a government budget that is counted in the trillions, 20, 30, 40 billion is a small potato and will not change the fact that the United States is the biggest debtor country in the world, whose debts are now rising significantly faster than the GDP, the productivity of the economy as a whole, which has been and is a warning sign. The war in Ukraine has pit the United States mostly against Russia. The United States tried to get the European countries to be allied in this war against Russia. And the Russians, for their part, tried to get an alliance going with China, India, and that group of countries, that growing group of countries known as the BRICS. Russia has been helped in building a powerful alliance by Mr. Trump's tariffs. Why? Because the countries that are hurt because the goods they want to send to America are costing more because the U.S. government taxes them, that's what the tariffs do, are making the logical business decision. Send fewer goods to the United States. Send your products to other countries that don't have a tariff, that do not have a Mr. Trump raising tariffs all the time, have nothing like it. The vast majority of countries in the world are not doing what Mr. Trump is doing. In fact, none of them, not a one, is doing it. So countries are upset with what the United States is doing, trying to improve its own economy at the expense of everybody else. Oh, you can call it Make America Number One, but the rest of the world understands it as a hostile economic hurt imposed on them. and they don't like it, and they don't want it. And one of the ways to deal with it is to sell your products somewhere else. And so they are working with one another. That's why BRICS is increasing its power, its size, and its economic clout. In sharp contrast, because Mr. Trump has imposed tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and the Europeans, the alliance of the United States used to be called the Group of Seven, the G7, United States, Canada, Japan, Britain, France, Italy, and Germany, are at each other's throats, heaving tariffs against one another. The Europeans responding angrily to Mr. Trump. The Canadians responding angrily to Mr. Trump. The Mexicans responding angrily to Mr. Trump. Do you think it's smart in a world where a whole nother economic power competitor has arisen, the People's Republic of China? Do you really want to impose tariffs that destroy the alliances you need to depend on? Wow. That's an example of the tariffs. Well, I think that in the long run, this is an unmitigated disaster. I'll say a few words about it in a moment. In the short run, and I think that's what's going on, in the short run, he's desperate for political points, and you're getting behavior that goes with that. He's looking for whatever agreement he can get, whether it's with Japan or the Philippines or Vietnam or whatever it is, that can make it look like he's getting what he was out there for, can stoke up his image as a powerful leader who can bully the rest of the world to go on. But let's take a look at what underlies the bullying, because that's the longer run. And the longer run is, I think the way to look at this is as follows. The United States has serious economic difficulties, and it is an empire in decline. And those two things end up meaning that this empire, to slow its own decline, is willing to sacrifice the relationships it had with many, many other countries. And it is willing to do that in a stark and kind of unforgiving way that is teaching all of those countries, friendly, neutral, hostile, teaching them a lesson they have to acknowledge. And the same is true for other corporations, companies, capitalists in all these different countries. You can't do business with the United States the way you once thought you could. The tariff shows you that. The insistence on a tariff shows you that. The threat, which has been articulated by Mr. Trump repeatedly, that if you're a country that retaliates to the tariff imposed or the tariff increase imposed by the United States, well, then we will hit you again by raising the tariff in a kind of escalating procedure. We are going to hurt you economically if we can. Yes, it's American companies importing all this stuff that have to pay the tax. But we all know, if we do a little bit of economics, that those companies that face a rising cost because they have to give Uncle Sam a tariff for everything they bring in, they will do everything in their power to reduce, shift, get rid of this extra cost, just like they would with every other cost that they encounter and that they've always done. So here's the things they will do. They will push it forward, charge the final consumer a higher price. That's one way to relieve the burden on you. And the other one is to go back to the source country from whom you buy and try to get them to give you a lower price so that they absorb the tariff. But Mr. Trump's problem is, either way, however each company does it, he will lose. He will get hostility from the rest of the world, and he will get a loss of support from his own consumer public base. He's caught. This is not a solution except in the posture of what he's doing, because if you've noticed, he likes to talk about tariffs as if the victim of them was unilaterally, obviously, and totally the country of origin, which is not only bad economics, but is in the short run, even in the short run, a very short-term advantage until people pay the higher prices, or the hostility of other countries shows up in the fact that they cut the United States out of their growth plans. And I know that that is happening from companies I'm associated with. That's already underway in many other parts of the world. And here's a footnote. The graph you showed us at the beginning, it's really unspeakable. The worst economy in Europe right now, by many measures, is the United Kingdom. For them to be accumulating dollar holdings when they are in desperate need of using those dollars to develop their own economy out of the hole into which it has sunk, is a screaming comment on the Starmer government and on the conservatives that went before. What a disaster that place has become. The Americans. Because what the Americans are doing is making things more difficult for everybody. And so there's enough plausibility, it'll be an exaggeration, but it'll be an exaggeration based on something that is real, that is in the newspapers all the time, that they know about, hear about. And what you're therefore doing is, it's not that you're not doing so-called soft power, the way they used to call this. You are undoing half a century of soft power. You are transforming the United States from the interesting place where you can buy, jeans or clothing or movies or all the railroads, the infrastructure, the steel mills, the iron works, all of it. And then, this is so crucial, and it's crucial economically and ideologically. Starting around the 1970s, American industrial capitalists had an epiphany. Two things overwhelmed them. Number one, the internet and all that it represents. And number two, jet engine travel. Suddenly, you could keep tabs, you could supervise a factory in China as easily as you could 50 miles away in a neighboring US state. And likewise, in a few hours, you could be there if you had to be on the ground to solve a problem. It suddenly meant, and this is the way they saw it, and I'm not saying they had to see it this way, but this is the way they saw it. We can make much more money, more profit, if we move production over there to where the wages are a small fraction of what they have become here in the United States or in Western Europe because of generations of class struggle in which the working class pushed up their wages against the fierce opposition of the capitalists, but an opposition that they eventually overcame, at least to a considerable extent. And no sooner did the early capitalists who were willing to take the risk close the factory in Chicago, open it in Tianjin, and solve all of the problems of such a move, and there are many. It became clear that even when you add the cost of shipping all that stuff back to the United States, it was still profitable, which meant that all the competitors who are American, of the American companies that go first, have to do it too. And you suddenly have, over the last 75 years, but particularly the last 50, 70 to now, you have a mass profit-driven exodus of American industry over to China. I mean, to India, to Brazil, but mainly to China. And the problem ideologically is no one had a gun to their heads. They did that voluntarily to pursue profits, to generate a tremendous boom in the American stock market since the 1980s that reflected all of that. And in order to be critical, you have to say who the culprit was. It wasn't the government. It wasn't the labor unions. It was corporations who were already profitable, who were beginning to suffer the competition of the returned German and Japanese capitalists, but who nonetheless made a decision to deindustrialize the United States, the way that Europeans are doing it now, because they can't afford the high prices of education that their own sanctions against Russia brought on themselves. So don't be surprised if a system makes decisions that bring onto itself an evolution about which they later become very unhappy. That's what you have now. That's why it's important to blame China, as if they are the ones who made all this happen, as if they are the ones aggressively pushing their way into the world economy and squeezing the American dominance. It is a sad sequential history, and the United States is itself the problem and the flaw in all of this. And unless and until they can figure out a way to change that, which protection does not do because of the examples Sean and I have given, well, then they're stuck. And they're just stuck in a decline, which they seem totally unable to admit, let alone reverse. And here's what I would say. I think we are headed like a runaway train going down a very fast track, heading straight for a stone wall. I do expect there will be a crash. Of course, I can't tell you exactly how or exactly when. No one can. But all the conditions, whether it's an overvalued stock market or it's all the comments and analyses that Sean and I have tried to summarize here, that's what I see coming. And that makes me wonder whether or not we may be in for a kind of rerun of the last time American capitalism crashed in the 1920s and the end of 1920s and the 1930s. At that time, the American people went sharply, the working class, to the left. It supported a communist party, two socialist parties, and the greatest labor union organizing drive in American history, the greatest one before or since that time. And I would not be surprised at all if the reaction of the American working class is, we have been neoliberal supporters and it didn't work for us. And then we tried the right wing, Mr. Trump and the MAGA, and it didn't work for us. We will now try the left. And whether it's Bernie Sanders or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or now Mr. Mamdani here in New York City, or Mr. Fateh in Minneapolis, interest in socialism, which is less about socialism and more an alienation from the capitalist system, growing quickly in the United States, may give us a hint as to where this is all going. The dollar was undone. I mean, you are looking at the United States punishing its allies for being allies. And you're giving them a bigger and bigger reason to consider joining the BRICS, rethinking and refashioning their relationships with China, Russia, and the rest of the BRICS as a defense against what is happening to their economies through their association with the United States. And that's part of the larger picture called a declining American capitalist empire. That these are the ways that works out. And I think it's important to see the utter damage being done. I would just add that, as always, there are larger social context, in a sense, for this as well. You know, many billions of dollars that came in as a demand for dollars, for example, by tourists. All the signs indicate that there's a tremendous fall off in European, Canadian, and many other tourists who are simply, you know, they see one more picture of masked ICE agents arresting an 80-year-old man at the border who's a longtime citizen and deporting him to Guatemala before they can straighten out, if they can, their mistake. They don't want this experience, and the experience is being repeated over and over again. The reward for a really disastrous 6 months of horrible publicity for ICE was a tax bill that gives ICE many billions more dollars to presumably do more of this horrific policy. Gallup poll this last week indicated a dramatic shift among Republicans in those who were in favor of harsh deportation and those who now say that immigration is a good thing for the United States. This is very, very bad news for Mr. Trump in terms of his signature immigration issue as a way to get support. But it also is a decline in the demand for the dollar. I have friends in New York City who tell me that fancy housing in the United States that used to be a major purchase by foreigners to park their money in the United States. Well, you know, if you understand the logic, the foreigner has to buy dollars with which then to make the purchase of the property here. And if they don't want the property, they don't buy the dollars. And if they sell the property, they then sell the dollars that they got for selling the property. Okay, that's like a diminution in buying. An increase in the selling of the dollar has to be factored into what's shaping the value of the dollar. And I think what you're seeing in the growth of the BRICS, which Mr. Trump himself glimpses a little bit, is the growth of a bloc that has less and less interest in holding dollars and more interest in replacing them. I don't think they're quite so clear in their minds to what to replace them with. They're either going to trade in their own currencies or they're going to trade in some new composite substitute currency, you know, something that blockchain or others can handle for them. But this is all bad news for the value of the dollar. And another way to make Michael's point is to say that a traditional tool of policy is a devaluation of your currency, one way or another, in order to stimulate exports. Listening to Mr. Trump, I think someone gave him the right idea. If you lower the value, you improve exports. But if you haven't taken into account that the world is not buying most of what you have to sell, that problem negates the benefit you had expected to reach from the devaluation. And so all of these things are kind of coming together with the decline of the U.S. empire as the broad conceptual framework to give you these anomalous results, these situations where you have a policy to lower the value, to raise or to sustain the value of the dollar, but instead you see it ebbing away. And just for those who are not familiar with the number, a decline in the value of the dollar, if I understand it, from the date of his inauguration, January 20, to right now, a devaluation of your currency by 8 to 10% in 6 months is an extraordinary decline. This is not the way currency markets work. They don't bounce around that way. So this is something significant is going on to give you that kind of a fall, even before you ask the question, how do you get that, when the objective officially was to do the opposite, to raise the value. Yeah, the German thing is, for me, since I follow events in Germany, particularly amazing to watch.
Yep. Yeah, something has to give. There, at some point, you're going to have countries acting in their own self-interest. And their own self-interest is going to be, let's somehow figure out a way of going it alone with our closest allies. And the closest allies are economies that are growing the most rapidly. And the most rapidly growing economy is China. So I don't see how America's anti-China, anti-Russia Cold War coalition is going to be able to withstand the force of just economic determinism from Europe to Latin America to Africa to Asia.
Yeah, and Germany, you know, I shake my head in disbelief. They're about to dismantle their social democracy safety net in order to become a military superpower. To fight whom? You know, what is this about? And the United States is pulling out of Ukraine. The Germans are replacing them to fight a war that they will lose. This is, you shake your head. Mr. Merz, you know, there's no future for what he's doing. I don't see, you know, why he's doing it. I mean, he's an American friend. I understand that. You know, he worked for BlackRock or Blackstone, one of them, was the head of the German division of that company. But this is crazy. This is so crazy that you wonder how long it will last before the German middle and the German left, both of which are very large, much larger than American media let you know, before they blow these people away. And then they're going to have an incentive to move Europe in just the way Michael hinted. They'll ask very new questions about what the relationship to Russia and China would be. And if you don't believe me that way, let me put it to you another. If the right wing were to win, the Alternative für Deutschland, if that were to actually win, they're even more interested in changing the relationship with Russia and China. So this is a dead end for the old traditional politics, which is what Mr. Merz represents. Yeah, and I'd like to point out that it is beginning to have the effects that I think you and I, Michael, and you, Nima, were expecting and were hoping for. You know, when I awoke this morning, the headline that captured me was the announcement in Britain of the formation of a new left-wing British political party to be led by Jeremy Corbyn and a woman named Sultana, both of them former Labour Party members of Parliament. Corbyn was the head of the Labour Party, was replaced by Mr. Starmer, who is following Mr. Trump in terms of popularity these days, even without an Epstein story to tell. It is going to be, I predict, it's going to be one of the positions of this new party to expose the subordination of a declining England to the United States in a way that has to stop. And I think you're going to see an enormous number of British people from all walks of life and all political persuasions who are going to be able to be rallied under that because of the last few years of economic history culminating in Mr. Trump, who's creating this political possibility.
And if that works out in England, imagine how it's going to work out in other countries. They're going to say, there is a left-wing alternative to the right-wing alternative. So you're going, look at all of the counter reactions that Trump is inspiring that he obviously did not intend to do, but that's what's happening.
I wanted to comment also on the dollar because just to remind everyone of a history that I assume many of you know. At the end of World War II, there's this famous conference in the woods of New Hampshire, if I'm not mistaken, Bretton Woods, it's called, pretty famous in the history of global monetary affairs. And it had two very sharp economists, probably the greatest at the time. John Maynard Keynes represents Great Britain and is there to assert, I think it's fair to say, the importance of Britain in the world at that time. And that led him to propose a global economic arrangement in which the British pound continued to play, maybe a bit lesser, but nonetheless the dominant global currency, which it had been for more than a century at that point. Right? And there is an unknown, Harry Dexter White, by name, an economist, who basically says, no, you're not going to be the global currency. That's now passed to us. We're going to do it. And they fight and they argue and they reach a kind of a compromise, but it isn't such a compromise. It really is another step in diminishing the pound, not as much as they might otherwise have wanted to, and elevating the dollar, perhaps not as much as they might have wanted. But the direction was unmistakable, and everybody sees it in the years that follow. Okay, but let's keep that in mind. What happened to the pound relative to the dollar is now happening to the dollar relative to what comes next. It shouldn't surprise you. It shouldn't amaze you. It isn't the end of the world. None of that. It is a reflection. World War II wrecked the British Empire. They didn't want to face it. They believed they were still the empire, but they weren't. And within 5 years, most of the empire, led by India, was no longer part of the empire. They lost it. And World War II was crucial. They were gone. And the United States, by contrast, emerged unequaled in its power because everybody else had been destroyed by the war. Britain, France, Germany, Japan, Russia, China, all of them wrecked by the war.
Well, Richard, that's a story that I talked about in Superimperialism. That's the whole center. And before Bretton Woods, the United States had already made a deal with Britain, the British loan. And the condition of the British loan was that they could not maintain empire preference. In other words, all the money that India, as you pointed out, and other countries, many global South countries had built up during the war as part of the sterling area, had to spend their money under the old rules in Britain. And that was how Britain had hoped